Hi, I'm Trevor Kade. The morning my father slid a duffel bag across the kitchen floor and told me I wasn't family material was the same morning $87 million hit my business account from a Saudi energy consortium. They said I was a disappointment, that I'd never amount to anything, that my obsession with dirt and rock formations was embarrassing the family name. That duffel bag, the one my Uncle Don gave me when I was 19, it scraped across their pristine tile like they were sweeping out garbage. What they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that by the time the sun set that day, I'd already signed the papers to buy the house they were kicking me out of. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. And the real twist? My sister Vanessa's new best friend, the Saudi prince she kept bragging about at every family dinner. He wasn't just some wealthy socialite she met at a charity gala. He was my business partner. He'd been wiring me payments for 2 years. But here's what broke me more than the money or the betrayal. It was discovering that my own grandfather had left everything to me in his original will, and they'd spent 15 years making sure I never found out. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound cutting through the silence that Saturday morning. It wasn't even 7 yet, and the Oklahoma sun was still crawling up from behind the flat horizon, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and dusty pink. I sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm in my hands, staring at the small crack in the ceramic mug that had been there for as long as I could remember. My mother stood at the counter with her back to me, wiping down surfaces that were already clean, moving the dish towel in tight mechanical circles. My father sat across from me, but he wasn't looking at me. He never really did anymore. His eyes were locked on his phone, thumb scrolling with the kind of rhythm that said he'd rather be anywhere else. There was no good morning. No how did you sleep. Just the thick, oppressive quiet that made the air feel like it was pressing down on my chest. I'd been staying in their guest room for 3 weeks. Not because I needed to. Not because I was broke or desperate. I was between leases after selling my small place near downtown to reinvest in another land acquisition deal. I told them it would be temporary, maybe a month tops while I closed on a new property. They'd said it was fine. My mother had even smiled when I brought my things in, though the smile never reached her eyes. But the temperature in the house had dropped every day since. Little comments. Sideways glances. Vanessa showing up unannounced with her husband Brad. Walking through the house like she was appraising it, making remarks about how crowded it felt now. I knew what was coming. You always know when you've overstayed a welcome you were never really given in the first place. My mother finally turned around, folding the towel with the precision of someone preparing for surgery. She didn't sit down. She just stood there at the edge of the counter, hands resting on the granite like she was bracing herself. "We need to talk, Trevor," she said. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. I set the mug down carefully, the ceramic making a dull thud against the wooden table. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "Your father and I have been discussing your situation," she continued, glancing briefly at him. He still didn't look up. "We think it's time you start taking full responsibility for your own life. You're almost 40. I felt something twist in my stomach. Not surprise, just the dull ache of confirmation. "I have been responsible," I said quietly. "I've been working. I pay my own bills. I'm just between places." "That's the problem," my father finally spoke, still not meeting my eyes. "You're always between something. Between jobs, between apartments, between ideas. You've been chasing this oil field fantasy for what, 8 years now?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Vanessa's voice cut through from the hallway before I could. "Longer than that," she said, stepping into the kitchen with Brad trailing behind her. She was dressed like she'd just come from a yoga class, athleisure that probably cost more than most people's rent, hair pulled back in a flawless ponytail. Try more like his whole adult life. He's been playing geologist since college and pretending it's a career. Brad smirked, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice level. "I'm not pretending anything. I run a consulting business. I work with energy companies. I analyze land surveys and mineral rights. It's legitimate work." My mother's face didn't change. "Trevor, we're not trying to be cruel. We just think you need a reality check. You don't have a family. You don't have stability. And you're still living like you're in your 20s. I felt the words land, each one a small cut. My father finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "We've been enabling you," he said. "That stops today." My sister walked over to the far side of the kitchen and nudged something with her foot. I heard the scrape before I saw it. The duffel bag. My old military surplus duffel that I'd left in the garage months ago when I moved in. It slid across the tile and bumped against the leg of my chair. I stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at her. She wasn't even trying to hide the satisfaction in her eyes. "You've got 2 hours," my mother said, her voice still calm, still measured. "We think that's fair." I didn't argue. I didn't ask for more time. I didn't beg or plead or try to explain the contracts I'd signed or the deals I'd closed or the fact that I had more money in my business accounts than they'd see in 3 lifetimes. I just stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, too loud in the thick silence. I walked past my sister without a word, past Brad's smug grin, and headed toward the guest room. My hands were steady as I grabbed my laptop bag, my work boots, a change of clothes. I didn't bother with anything else. Most of my things were still in storage anyway. They'd probably already gone through it, thrown half of it out. The duffel was heavier than I remembered, the canvas worn and faded, but it had been with me since my first real job on a rig outside Woodward. Uncle Don had given it to me the day I told him I wanted to work in energy. He clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Don't let anyone tell you dirt doesn't have value." Some of the richest men in this state made their fortune understanding what's under it. I came back down the hallway with the bag slung over my shoulder, laptop case in hand. My mother was standing by the front door now, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line. My father had moved to the living room, looking out the window with his hands in his pockets. Vanessa had perched herself on the arm of the couch, legs crossed, phone in hand, probably texting someone about this very moment. As I reached for the door handle, my father turned. His face was hard, distant. He reached into the closet by the door and pulled out my old work jacket, the faded denim one with the logo from my first consulting gig stitched on the chest. The threads were frayed, the collar worn soft from years of use. He held it out, not quite offering it, just extending it like he wanted it gone. "Take your trash," he said. I stared at the jacket, at the man holding it, and something inside me went very still. I reached out slowly and took it from him. The fabric felt familiar, grounding. I looked at it for a moment, then folded it carefully and set it down on the porch bench just outside the door. "I know what this is," I said, my voice low but steady. "This isn't about responsibility. This is about control. And I'm not giving you that anymore." My mother inhaled sharply. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Trevor. You're not a victim here." I didn't say I was. I didn't say anything else. I just stepped off the porch, duffel bag over one shoulder, laptop case in the other hand, and walked down the driveway. The October air was crisp, cooler than it had been all week. Leaves skittered across the pavement, dry and brittle. I heard the door close behind me, not slam, just shut. Final. I kept walking until I reached the corner of Oak Ridge Drive, where the bus stop sat beneath a faded awning. I set the duffel down on the bench and sat beside it, pulling my coat tighter even though I wasn't really cold. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My phone was in my pocket. I could feel it there, solid and heavy. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. 3 notifications. The first was an email from Alexis Chun, my CFO, with the subject line, "Wire confirmed. Funds cleared." The second was a calendar reminder. Quarterly report due Monday. The third was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. Prince Faisal Al Rahman. The message was short. Payment received. Looking forward to continued partnership. Pleasure doing business with a man of vision. I read it twice, then leaned back against the bench and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My sister had spent the last 6 months dropping his name at every family gathering. Vanessa had met him at some international charity event in Dallas, one of those black tie affairs where people donated money to feel important. She'd come back glowing, talking about how charming he was, how connected, how he'd told her he was investing heavily in American energy infrastructure. She'd even posted photos with him on social media, captions about building bridges between cultures and supporting global initiatives. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Faisal and I had been in business together for over 2 years. He wasn't just some socialite she impressed at a gala. He was the primary stakeholder in a consortium that had contracted my company to manage mineral rights assessments and drilling optimization across properties in Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle. The $87 million that had just cleared? That was the final payment on a 3-phase project we'd completed 4 months ahead of schedule. I'd met him in a conference room in Houston, not a ballroom in Dallas. We'd negotiated terms over technical reports and geological surveys, not champagne and small talk. And he'd never once mentioned knowing my sister. I didn't know if he'd made the connection or if he just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. She'd been parading him around like a prize while I was signing contracts that made her husband's legal salary look like pocket change. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stared out at the empty street. A car rolled past, brake lights flashing at the stop sign before turning left. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like judgment. I thought about calling someone. Uncle Don, maybe. He'd been the only one who ever believed in what I was doing, who understood that oil and gas wasn't just about rigs and roughnecks. It was about data, rights, logistics, foresight. But I didn't call. I just sat there, letting the weight of the morning settle over me like dust. 15 years. That's how long it had been since my grandfather passed. I was 23, fresh out of college with a geology degree, and a head full of ideas nobody wanted to hear. He'd been the one who told me to trust my instincts, to look where others weren't looking, to remember that the best opportunities were usually hidden under layers of bureaucracy and assumption. At his funeral, my father had read a short prepared statement. My mother had cried in a way that felt performative. Vanessa had worn black and played the grieving granddaughter for the church crowd. I'd stood in the back, hands in my pockets, and watched them act like they'd lost something precious. A week later, they told me the estate had been settled. Everything went to my father, a modest amount, nothing shocking. Grandpa had been comfortable but not wealthy, or so they said. There was no mention of a will, no reading, no lawyers. Just a quiet closing of accounts and the sale of his small house on the north side of town. I hadn't questioned it. I'd been too young, too grief-stricken, too focused on trying to start my career. But over the years, little things hadn't added up. Comments my uncle made. References to properties I'd never heard of. A trust account my father mentioned once and then never again. I pushed it aside, told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their money or their approval. I'd build my own future. And I had. But now, sitting on that bench with everything I owned in a duffel bag, and a business empire they didn't even know existed, the questions came back sharper than before. What had they kept from me? And why? My phone buzzed again. This time it was Alexis. Congratulations on the close. Want to grab lunch this week and talk next steps? I typed back quickly. Sounds good. I'll check my calendar and get back to you. Then I opened my banking app, hesitated for just a second and logged in. The number stared back at me, bold and undeniable. Current balance, business operating account, $94,612,347. I closed the app and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The bus was pulling up to the stop, brakes hissing as it slowed. I grabbed the duffel, slung it over my shoulder and stood. The doors folded open. The driver, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, glanced at me briefly. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I replied. I climbed the steps, tapped my card and found a seat near the back. The bus lurched forward, and I watched through the scratched window as Oak Ridge Drive disappeared behind me. The house, the street, the life they thought I'd never escape. Gone. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to calm. Not happiness, not yet. But certainty. They'd thrown me out thinking I had nowhere to go. What they didn't realize was that I'd already bought the ground they were standing on. And soon they'd know it too. I rode the bus downtown, watching the city blur past in shades of gray concrete and faded brick. Tulsa had a way of looking both tired and resilient at the same time, like it had seen better days but refused to give up. The bus emptied out at each stop, workers heading to shifts, students with backpacks, a woman with 2 small children who kept asking if they were there yet. I stayed in my seat near the back, duffel bag wedged between my feet, laptop case resting on my lap like a shield. When we reached the downtown terminal, I stepped off into the cool morning air and pulled out my phone. The Hampton Inn was 3 blocks away. I could have called an Uber, but I wanted to walk. Needed to walk. Needed to feel my boots hit pavement and remind myself that I was still moving forward, still in control, even when everything felt like it was collapsing inward. The lobby of the hotel smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and complimentary breakfast pastries. A young guy behind the desk, maybe 25, looked up from his computer with the practiced smile of someone who'd perfected customer service, but stopped meaning it years ago. Checking in, he asked. I need a room, I said. How many nights? I hesitated. I don't know yet. Let's start with a week. He nodded, fingers already dancing across the keyboard. King bed, okay? That's fine. He asked for my ID and credit card. I handed them over, watching as he glanced at my name, then at me, then back at the screen. Everything processed smoothly. He slid a key card across the counter in a small paper sleeve. Room 214, second floor. Elevators to your right. Checkouts at 11, but if you need to extend, just let us know before 10 the night before. I thanked him, took the key, and headed for the elevator. The room was exactly what I expected. Beige walls, industrial blue carpet, a bed with too many pillows, a desk bolted to the wall, a television mounted across from it. The curtains were heavy and dark, blocking out most of the light even though it was barely 9 in the morning. I dropped the duffel on the floor, set my laptop case on the desk, and stood in the center of the room for a moment, just breathing. This was mine. Not theirs. Mine. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The view looked out over a parking garage and the backside of an office building. Nothing remarkable. Nothing comforting. But it was honest. No pretense. I let the curtain fall back and turned to the bathroom. The shower was small but clean, the water pressure decent. I stripped off the clothes I'd been wearing since last night, stepped under the hot spray, and let it run over me until the steam filled the room and I couldn't tell if the water on my face was from the shower or something else. When I finally stepped out, I felt lighter. Not better, just less weighed down. I toweled off, dressed in clean clothes from the duffel, jeans and a plain gray Henley, and sat down at the desk. My phone had been buzzing intermittently. I'd been ignoring it. Now I picked it up and scrolled through the notifications. 2 missed calls from Vanessa. No voicemail. A text from my mother. We didn't want it to be like this. You made it difficult. I stared at the message for a long time, reading it over and over, trying to find even a trace of sincerity in it. There wasn't any. Just justification. I didn't respond. I deleted it and moved on. There was an email from Richard Holbrook at First National Bank, my private wealth manager. Subject line, account review and asset consultation. I opened it. Mr. Kade, following the recent transfer, I wanted to confirm that your accounts are fully updated and accessible. If you'd like to discuss investment strategies or portfolio adjustments, please feel free to schedule a meeting at your convenience. I appreciate your continued trust in our services. I closed the email and leaned back in the chair. Richard didn't know the full story. Nobody at the bank did. They just saw numbers. Clean, legitimate, staggering numbers. But they didn't ask questions. That was what you paid for when you worked with private wealth management. Discretion. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the website for the Tulsa County Assessor's Office. Public records. Property searches. I'd done this 100 times in my line of work, analyzing land parcels, checking ownership histories, verifying legal descriptions. But this time it was different. I typed in the address. 4782 Oak Ridge Drive. The page loaded slowly, the county website clunky and outdated. Then the record appeared. Owner of record, Gordon and Patricia Kade. Purchase date, April 1992. Assessed value, $243,000. Mortgage status, satisfied as of 2008. No liens. No encumbrances. Clean title. I sat back and stared at the screen. They owned it outright. Free and clear. They'd paid it off years ago, probably with money from my grandfather's estate, though I'd never been told that directly. Just another thing I'd pieced together over time from half-heard conversations and financial breadcrumbs. I pulled up another tab and logged into the portal for my holding company, Kade Energy Solutions LLC. The dashboard displayed our active projects, revenue streams, asset listings. I scrolled down to the subsidiary entities. I had 3, each structured for different purposes. One handled consulting contracts. One managed mineral rights acquisitions. The third, the one I'd set up 8 months ago, was for real estate holdings. I'd named it Flint Ridge Holdings. Boring. Forgettable. Perfect. I clicked into the account. Current assets, 2 commercial properties in downtown Tulsa, both leased to tech startups. 1 residential building, a small apartment complex near the university, and a pending acquisition I'd initiated 4 weeks ago, before any of this started, before I'd even moved back into my parents' house. The address, 4782 Oak Ridge Drive. The deal had been structured through a third-party broker, an intermediary who specialized in discrete purchases. My name was nowhere on the paperwork, just the LLC. The offer had been generous, well above market value, and my parents had jumped at it. My mother had even mentioned it at dinner one night, excited about the unexpected windfall, talking about how they'd been approached by some investment company looking to acquire properties in established neighborhoods. They'd closed 3 days ago. My father had signed the papers. The money had transferred, and they had no idea who really bought it. I leaned forward and opened the digital file folder. There it was. Deed transfer. Signed, notarized, recorded with the county. Flint Ridge Holdings LLC was now the legal owner of 4782 Oak Ridge Drive. My parents were living in a house I owned. They'd kicked me out of my own property. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Almost. But there was something else in the folder, something the broker had sent over as part of the due diligence package. A note, flagged in red. Existing occupants unaware of ownership change. Broker advises notification within 30 days per standard protocol. Eviction proceedings available if occupancy terms violated. I sat back and exhaled slowly. I hadn't planned this. Not consciously. The purchase had been opportunistic, a solid investment in a neighborhood that was quietly appreciating. I hadn't known they'd kick me out. But now that they had, the pieces fell into place with a clarity that felt almost predestined. They'd handed me the moral high ground without even realizing it. I closed the laptop and stood walking over to the window again. The parking garage was filling up now, people arriving for work, starting their weekends, living their lives with no idea what was happening in this bland hotel room 2 floors above them. My phone buzzed. This time it was Uncle Don. The text was short and direct. Heard what happened? You okay? I typed back. I'm fine. Can I come by later? His response came within seconds. Anytime. Doors open. I pocketed the phone, grabbed my jacket and headed out. The drive to Broken Arrow took 20 minutes. Uncle Don lived on the east side of town in a neighborhood that hadn't changed much since the 70s. Small brick houses with carports, chain-link fences, dogs barking from backyards. His place was at the end of a cul-de-sac. A modest craftsman-style house with peeling paint on the shutters and a front porch cluttered with old tools and half-finished projects. I parked on the street and walked up the cracked driveway. The front door opened before I could knock. Uncle Don stood there in jeans and a faded Oklahoma State sweatshirt, gray hair sticking up in every direction, reading glasses perched on top of his head. He looked me over once, nodded and stepped aside. Get in here. The inside of his house smelled like coffee and motor oil. The living room was crowded with furniture that didn't match, bookshelves stuffed with paperbacks and old National Geographic magazines, a television playing a muted football game. He gestured toward the kitchen. Sit. I'll get you something. I followed him in and took a seat at the small table by the window. He poured 2 mugs of coffee without asking if I wanted any, set one in front of me, and sat down across from me with the other. So they finally did it, he said. I wrapped my hands around the mug. Yeah. He shook his head, mouth set in a grim line. I told Gordon years ago this would happen. Told him he was pushing you out piece by piece, and one day you'd be gone for good. He didn't listen. He never does. I took a sip of coffee. It was strong bitter, exactly what I needed. Do you know why they did it? I asked. Don snorted. Same reason they do everything. Control. Image. Your sister's got the husband, the kids, the whole setup they approve of. You? You don't fit the script. Never have. That bothered them more than they'd ever admit. I stared into the mug. I always thought if I just worked hard enough, proved myself enough, they'd see it. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Son, they saw it. That's the problem. They saw you building something real, something they didn't control, and it scared the hell out of them. I looked up. What do you mean? Don was quiet for a moment, then stood and walked over to a drawer near the sink. He pulled it open, rummaged through papers and receipts, and came back with a manila envelope, old and creased, the kind you'd find in a filing cabinet that hadn't been touched in years. He set it on the table between us. I wasn't supposed to keep this, he said. Your dad told me to get rid of it after your grandpa died. I didn't. I stared at the envelope. What is it? Open it. I reached out slowly, pulled the envelope toward me and lifted the flap. Inside was a stack of papers, legal documents, yellowed at the edges. I pulled them out carefully and unfolded the top sheet. Last will and testament of Robert James Kade. My grandfather's name, written in his slanted, deliberate handwriting at the top of the page. I scanned down, past the legal jargon, past the clauses about sound mind and legal capacity, until I reached the section labeled distribution of assets. To my son, Gordon Michael Kade, I leave the property located at 612 North Elm Street and any personal effects contained therein. To my granddaughter, Vanessa Claire Kade, I leave the sum of $15,000 to be held in trust until her 25th birthday. To my grandson, Trevor James Kade, I leave the entirety of my mineral rights holdings, business interests in Kade Exploration and Consulting, and all associated financial accounts, with the expressed wish that he continue the work I began and never let anyone convince him that understanding the land is anything less than essential. My hand started shaking. I read it again. Then again. The mineral rights. The business interests. The accounts. All of it. To me. I looked up at Don, my throat tight. This isn't what they told me. He shook his head slowly. No, it's not. Your grandfather revised his will 6 months before he died. Had it notarized, filed with his lawyer, everything proper and legal. Then he had a stroke. By the time he passed, your dad had already started making moves. The lawyer was an old friend of the family, somebody Gordon played golf with. Things got muddy. Papers got lost. New documents appeared. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They replaced it. Don nodded. I can't prove it. But I know my brother. And I know what he's capable of when he thinks he's protecting his legacy. I set the papers down carefully, like they might disintegrate if I handled them too roughly. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you tell me? He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Because I was a coward. Because I was still trying to keep the peace. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd be better off not knowing, that you build your own thing and wouldn't need their approval or their money. He looked at me, eyes weary. I was wrong. You deserved to know. The silence stretched between us, heavy and sharp. Outside, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Life continued, oblivious. Do you know what happened to the mineral rights? I asked quietly. Don shook his head. They sold them. Piecemeal over the years. Got maybe 30-40 cents on the dollar because they didn't understand what they had. Your grandpa had claims all over western Oklahoma, some in the Panhandle. Good land. Smart acquisitions. They liquidated it and pocketed the cash. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just clarity. They stole from me. Plain and simple. Don didn't disagree. I folded the will carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Can I keep this? It's yours, he said. Always was. I stood, tucking the envelope under my arm. Don stood too, walking me toward the door. What are you going to do? He asked. I looked at him, this man who'd worked rigs his whole life, who'd given me my first duffel bag and told me dirt had value, who'd kept a secret for 15 years because he didn't know what else to do. I'm going to take back what's mine, I said. Not just the money. The truth. He nodded slowly. Just don't lose yourself in it. Revenge has a way of eating people from the inside. I'm not looking for revenge, I said. I'm looking for accountability. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, squeezed once and let me go. I drove back to the hotel in silence, the envelope sitting on the passenger seat like a passenger I couldn't ignore. When I got back to the room, I spread the documents out on the desk and photographed every page with my phone. Then I sent them to Alexis with a brief message. Need legal consultation. Possible estate fraud. Can you connect me with someone who specializes in probate and trust litigation? Her response came back within 10 minutes. Already on it. I'll have a name for you by end of day. Are you okay? I typed back. Getting there. The rest of the afternoon blurred. I ordered room service, something I never did. A burger and fries that arrived on a tray covered with a metal dome like I was someone important. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, my mind spinning through scenarios and strategies. By evening, Alexis had sent me a contact. James Okonkwo, probate and estate litigation specialist. Offices in downtown Tulsa. Available Monday morning if I wanted to move fast. I scheduled the appointment, confirmed by email, and then sat back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Vanessa. The text was colder than the others. Mom and Dad are upset. You could at least apologize for making this harder than it needed to be. We were trying to help you grow up. I read it 3 times, feeling something shift inside me with each pass. Then I typed a response. I don't need to grow up. I needed a family that didn't treat me like a problem to solve. You'll hear from me soon. Not the way you expect. I hit send before I could second guess it. Her response was immediate. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer. I turned off my phone, set it face down on the nightstand, and lay back on the bed, staring at the dark ceiling. Outside, the city hummed. Traffic. Voices. Life moving forward while mine hung in this strange suspended moment between what was and what would be. I thought about my grandfather, about the hours I'd spent with him as a kid, riding in his old truck out to survey sites, listening to him talk about soil composition and water tables and the way land told you its secrets if you knew how to listen. He'd believed in me when no one else did. And they'd erased him. Erased his wishes. Erased me from his legacy. But I wasn't erased anymore. I was right here. And I had the resources, the knowledge, and the proof to make sure they understood exactly what they'd done. Sleep didn't come easy that night, but when it did, it was dreamless. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through a gap in the curtains. I showered, dressed in clean clothes, and checked my phone. One new email. From Richard Holbrook at the bank. Mr. Kade, I wanted to follow up on a separate matter that came to my attention during a routine audit. There appears to be a historical account linked to your family name. Established in 2009 under the estate of Robert James Kade. The account was closed in 2010, but there are discrepancies in the transfer documentation. If you'd like to discuss this further, I'm available at your earliest convenience. I read the email twice, pulse quickening. Another piece. Another thread. I forwarded it to James Okonkwo with a note, adding this to the consultation. See you Monday. Then I got dressed, grabbed my jacket, and headed out. I wasn't going to sit in that hotel room and wait. I was going to move. The Philbrook Museum sat on a hill overlooking Midtown Tulsa. A sprawling Italian Renaissance villa surrounded by gardens that looked like something out of a European postcard. I didn't go inside. I just walked the grounds, hands in my pockets, breathing in the cool October air. Families wandered past, kids running ahead on the paths, couples holding hands. Normal people living normal lives. I found a bench near the reflecting pool and sat down, watching the water ripple in the breeze. My phone was off. My mind was quiet. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about what came next. I was just sitting. Just breathing. Just being. A woman walked past with a small dog on a leash, the kind of dog that looked more like a mop than an animal. She smiled at me as she passed. I smiled back. Felt strange. Foreign. But not bad. When the sun started to dip lower in the sky, I stood and walked back to my car. Tomorrow I'd meet with the lawyer. Tomorrow the wheels would start turning in earnest. But tonight I'd let myself rest. Because the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Monday morning came with a crispness that made the air feel clean. Almost new. I dressed carefully, not in a suit, I'd never been that kind of businessman, but in dark jeans, a pressed button-down, and a blazer that said I took this seriously without trying too hard. The offices of Okonkwo and Associates sat on the 8th floor of a downtown building that had been renovated sometime in the last decade. All glass and steel and exposed brick, trying to look both modern and historic at once. The lobby smelled faintly of expensive coffee and leather furniture. A receptionist with perfectly styled locks looked up as I approached, her smile professional but genuine. Mr. Kade, she said before I could introduce myself. Mr. Okonkwo is expecting you. Conference room B, just down that hallway to your left. I thanked her and followed the corridor, my boots quiet on the polished concrete floor. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a long table made of reclaimed wood, and enough technology built into the walls to run a small corporation. James Okonkwo stood when I entered, extending a hand across the table. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with close-cropped hair going silver at the temples and the kind of calm, assessing gaze that said he'd heard every story and wasn't easily shocked. "Mr. Kade," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Thank you for coming in on short notice. Please have a seat." I shook his hand and sat down across from him. He'd already laid out a leather portfolio on the table, a yellow legal pad filled with notes beside it. "I sent over the documents," I said. "The will, the email from the bank." He nodded. "I've reviewed everything you provided. I also took the liberty of doing some preliminary research into your grandfather's estate, public records, probate filings, that sort of thing. What I found is, let's say, concerning." I leaned forward slightly. "Concerning how?" He opened the portfolio and slid a document across the table toward me. "This is the will that was filed with the probate court in 2010, shortly after your grandfather's death. Take a look at the date and the witness signatures." I picked up the paper, scanning the top section. The date was 2 weeks after my grandfather had passed. The witnesses were names I didn't recognize. I looked up. "This isn't the will Uncle Don showed me." "No," Okonkwo said. "It's not. The will your uncle provided, the one naming you as the primary beneficiary for the mineral rights and business interests, that document was notarized 6 months before your grandfather died. This one," he tapped the paper in my hand, "was allegedly signed 3 days before his death, during a time when, according to medical records I was able to access, your grandfather was heavily medicated and barely conscious following his stroke." I set the document down carefully, a cold weight settling in my chest. "So this is a forgery?" Okonkwo steepled his fingers. "That's the most likely explanation. Proving it will require forensic analysis of the signatures, testimony from medical professionals regarding your grandfather's capacity, and likely a handwriting expert. It's not a simple process, but it's absolutely doable, especially given the discrepancies in the witness statements and notary stamps." He slid another paper across. "This is interesting too. According to the probate records, the estate was valued at roughly $85,000. Property, personal effects, a small savings account. But your uncle's version references mineral rights holdings and business interests." I did some digging. He pulled out a printed spreadsheet, columns of data highlighted in yellow. Between 2000 and 2009, your grandfather held active claims on parcels in Woodward County, Texas County, and Beaver County. Those claims were transferred to your father's name in late 2010, just months after the probate closed. Then, over the next 5 years, they were sold off in increments. Total proceeds conservatively around $2.3 million. I felt my jaw tighten. "And none of that was reported in the estate." "Correct," Okonkwo said. "Which suggests the assets were deliberately concealed during probate or transferred prior to death under circumstances we'd need to investigate. Either way, if you were the rightful heir to those assets as indicated in the earlier will, you have grounds for a lawsuit. Not just against your father, but potentially against the attorney who handled the probate and anyone else who knowingly participated in the misrepresentation." I sat back, processing. "What are we looking at in terms of timeline?" He made a note on his legal pad. "Filing a petition to contest the probate and investigate fraud, 2 to 3 weeks to prepare. Discovery phase, gathering documents, depositions, that could take 6 months to a year depending on cooperation. Trial if it goes that far, another year. But," he looked up, his expression sharpening, "most of these cases settle. Once the other side realizes the evidence is stacked against them, they'd rather negotiate than risk a judgment that could include punitive damages and legal fees." "What about criminal charges?" I asked. "Could they face prosecution for this?" Okonkwo hesitated. "That's harder. Fraud cases in probate can be pursued criminally, but prosecutors are often reluctant unless the evidence is overwhelming and the dollar amounts are significant. Your best path is civil litigation. We win the case, you recover damages, and their reputations take the hit. That might be more effective than a criminal trial that drags on for years." I nodded slowly, turning it over in my mind. "There's something else," I said. "I recently purchased the house my parents live in. Through an LLC. They don't know I own it. They kicked me out of that house 2 days ago. Okonkwo's eyebrows lifted slightly, the first real reaction I'd seen from him. He paused, quite the coincidence. It wasn't planned, I said. At least not consciously. The opportunity came up and I took it. But now that it's happened, I'm wondering if there's a way to use it strategically. He leaned back, tapping his pen against the legal pad. You could initiate eviction proceedings. Given that they're residing in a property you own without a formal lease agreement, you'd have legal standing. That said, it would likely escalate tensions and could complicate the probate case if they argue you're acting out of malice, rather than pursuing legitimate legal remedies. I considered that. What if I don't initiate eviction? What if I just let them know I own it? Okonkwo smiled faintly. That's a psychological play, not a legal one. It might shake them, make them more willing to settle, or it might entrench them further. People react unpredictably when they feel cornered. I'd advise caution, but ultimately it's your call. I drummed my fingers on the table, staring out the window at the city beyond. The morning sun was climbing higher, casting sharp shadows across the rooftops. Do it, I said. File the petition. Start the discovery process. Let's see what they're really made of. Okonkwo nodded, making another note. I'll draft the documents and have them ready for your review by end of week. In the meantime, avoid any direct confrontations with your family. Don't discuss the case. Don't acknowledge their messages beyond what's absolutely necessary. Let the legal process do the talking. I stood and he stood with me, shaking my hand again. One more thing, I said. If this goes public, if it ends up in the media, I want to be prepared. He met my gaze evenly. Very well might. Estate disputes involving prominent families, and I'm assuming your father has some standing in the community, tend to attract attention. We can try to keep it quiet, but once court filings become public record, there's only so much we can control. I nodded. Then I'll deal with it when it comes. I left the office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time, if that was possible. Lighter because I'd finally taken a concrete step, set things in motion that couldn't be undone. Heavier because I knew what this would cost, not in money but in the finality of it. There was no going back after this. No reconciliation. No awkward holiday dinners where we all pretended things were fine. This was severance, clean and absolute. I stopped at a coffee shop on my way back to the hotel. One of those local places with mismatched furniture and baristas who took their craft too seriously. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass on the street outside. A couple walked by holding hands, laughing at something one of them said. An older man shuffled past with a newspaper tucked under his arm. A woman in running gear jogged by, earbuds in, lost in her own world. Normal lives. Uncomplicated lives. Or maybe not. Maybe everyone carried something heavy. Something they didn't show. I sipped the coffee, bitter and strong, and pulled out my phone. I'd been avoiding it, but I couldn't anymore. 3 missed calls from my mother. 2 from Vanessa. A text from my father that simply said, "We need to talk. Figure this. I'll like adults." I almost laughed. Adults. As if they'd treated me like one. I typed back a single sentence. "I have nothing to say to you right now." Then I turned off notifications and put the phone face down on the table. The rest of the day passed in a strange suspended rhythm. I went back to the hotel, worked on some consulting reports that had been piling up, emails from clients who had no idea what was happening in my personal life and didn't need to. The work was grounding, technical, focused. It reminded me who I was outside of this family drama. By evening, I was restless again. I couldn't sit in that room anymore, staring at the same 4 walls. I grabbed my jacket and headed out. No destination in mind, just the need to move. I ended up at Guthrie Green, a park in the Arts District, strings of lights overhead, food trucks parked along the edges, people sprawled on blankets or sitting at picnic tables. There was a live band playing on the small stage, some local group doing covers of older rock songs. I found a spot on the grass near the back, far enough from the crowd to feel alone but close enough to hear the music. The bassist was good, holding down the rhythm with a steady driving pulse. The guitarist was flashy, all solos and flair. The singer had a raspy voice that sounded like he'd lived a little. I closed my eyes and let the music wash over me. Not thinking, just feeling. When I opened them again, a woman was standing a few feet away, looking at her phone with a slightly lost expression. She glanced up and caught me watching. "Excuse me," she said, "do you know if there's a bathroom around here?" I pointed toward the east side of the park. "Over there, near the food trucks." She smiled, relieved. "Thanks. I'm terrible with directions." "No problem." She started to walk away, then paused and turned back. "Are you here alone?" The question wasn't invasive, just curious, friendly. I nodded. "Yeah, just needed to get out for a bit." She gestured vaguely toward the crowd. "Same. Sometimes you just need to be around people without actually being with people, you know?" I smiled despite myself. "Yeah, I know." She gave a little wave and walked off toward the bathrooms. I watched her go, then turned back to the band. They were finishing up their set, the last song building to a crescendo before cutting off abruptly. The crowd clapped, a few people whistled. The night felt softer somehow, less sharp around the edges. I stayed until the park started to empty, the food trucks packing up, the lights dimming. Then I walked back to my car and drove to the hotel. The city quiet around me, streetlights casting long shadows across empty intersections. That night I dreamed about my grandfather. We were standing in a field somewhere out west, the sun low on the horizon, the grass tall and golden. He was holding a piece of paper, pointing at something written on it, but I couldn't read the words. He kept saying, "You have to look closer, Trevor. It's all there. You just have to look." I woke up with the dream still clinging to me, the image of his face vivid and sharp. I lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my heart to slow down. Then I got up, made coffee with the tiny machine on the desk, and checked my email. There was a message from Alexis. "Wanted to give you a heads up. Word's starting to get around about some family drama. Nothing specific, but people talk. Just be ready in case it leaks wider. Let me know if you need anything." I wrote back, "Thanks for the warning. I'm ready." By Wednesday, Okonkwo had sent over the draft petition. I read through it carefully, line by line, the legal language dense but clear. It laid out everything. The original will. The suspicious timing of the second will. The transfer of assets. The concealment during probate. The estimated damages. It was all there, stark and undeniable. I signed off on it, sent it back, and waited. Thursday morning, the petition was filed with the Tulsa County Court. By Thursday afternoon, my father had been served. I knew because my phone, which I turned back on, started blowing up. Calls, texts, voicemails, all of them variations on the same theme. Shock, anger, accusations. My mother's voicemail was the longest. Her voice shook, somewhere between fury and tears. "How could you do this? After everything we've done for you? You're tearing this family apart over money you were never entitled to. You've become someone I don't recognize." Vanessa's text was shorter and meaner. "You're pathetic. Suing your own family because you can't handle being a failure. Good luck finding anyone who'll stand by you after this." My father didn't leave a message. He just called over and over until I blocked the number. I didn't respond to any of them. Okonkwo had been clear. No engagement. Let the case speak. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me. There's a difference between knowing your family doesn't respect you and having it confirmed in writing, in anger, in voices that used to say they loved you. I spent the rest of the week in a kind of limbo, working during the day, going through the motions, and sitting in that hotel room at night, wondering if I'd made the right choice. Not about the lawsuit. I knew that was right. But about everything else. About staying in Tulsa. About not just disappearing to Houston or Denver or somewhere no one knew my name. Friday evening, Uncle Don called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Yeah," I said. "You doing okay?" he asked. His voice was softer than usual, careful. "I'm fine." He was quiet for a second. "Your dad called me. Tried to get me to talk you out of this. I told him to go to hell." Despite everything, I felt a smile tug at my mouth. "Thanks. You don't have to thank me," he said. "You're doing the right thing. It's gonna get uglier before it gets better. You need to be ready for that." "I know. If you need anything," Don said, "and I mean anything, you call me. Day or night." "I will." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed. Phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. The room felt smaller than it had a few days ago, the walls closing in. I needed air. I grabbed my jacket and headed down to the lobby, then out into the cool evening. The streets were busy. People heading to dinner or bars, the weekend energy already building. I walked without direction, just moving, until I found myself standing outside a bookstore I'd passed a dozen times but never gone into. It was one of those independent places, narrow and deep, shelves crammed floor to ceiling, the kind of store that felt like a refuge. I went inside. The smell hit me first, old paper and coffee and something faintly sweet, maybe incense. A guy behind the counter glanced up, nodded, then went back to his book. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers along the spines, not looking for anything in particular. In the back corner there was a section labeled Local History. I stopped, curious, and pulled out a book titled Tulsa's Black Gold: The Rise and Fall of Oklahoma's Oil Barons. I flipped through it, scanning photographs of men in suits standing beside drilling rigs, maps of claimed territories, stories of fortunes made and lost. There was a chapter on family legacies, how oil money had built empires and torn families apart in equal measure. I bought the book, tucked it under my arm, and walked back to the hotel. That night I read it cover to cover, highlighting passages that felt too close to my own story. One line in particular stuck with me. The land doesn't care who owns it. It only cares who understands it. I thought about my grandfather, about the way he taught me to read surveys and maps, to see potential where others saw nothing. He'd understood the land, and he'd wanted me to carry that forward. I closed the book and set it on the nightstand. Tomorrow I'd keep moving forward, one step at a time. The weekend passed in a blur of quiet preparation. I spent Saturday morning at a local diner, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone honey, working through financial documents Alexis had sent over. She'd compiled a comprehensive breakdown of every transaction tied to my grandfather's estate, cross-referenced with county records and bank statements going back 15 years. The pattern was undeniable. Assets had been systematically liquidated, the proceeds funneled into accounts my father controlled, and none of it had been disclosed during probate. By Sunday I'd organized everything into a digital presentation, clean and devastating, ready to hand over to Okonkwo when discovery began in earnest. I also started looking at properties, not to buy, just to look. Apartments downtown, lofts in the Brady Arts District, even a few houses in quieter neighborhoods. Places that could be mine, not borrowed time in someone else's space. I wasn't ready to commit yet, but I needed to see options to remind myself that this limbo was temporary. Monday brought the first real crack in my family's facade. I was sitting in the hotel room, reviewing a consulting contract for a client in Amarillo, when my phone buzzed with a notification. Not a call or text, but an alert from a news app. I almost ignored it, but something made me click. The headline was simple, direct, and public. Local family embroiled in estate dispute over late patriarch's will. My stomach tightened. I opened the article. It was short, maybe 300 words, published by the Tulsa Beacon, a local news outlet that covered court filings and community stories. The reporter, Monica Desai, had clearly pulled information from the public court records. The article didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. It referenced a petition filed by a family member alleging fraud in the probate of Robert James Kade's estate, estimated to involve millions in mineral rights and business assets. It mentioned my father by name as the executor of the contested will, and it noted that the case was being handled by Okonkwo and Associates, a firm known for high-stakes litigation. I read it twice, then set the phone down and exhaled slowly. So it was out there now. Public record, public knowledge. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing again. This time it wasn't family. It was people I hadn't heard from in years. Former classmates, old coworkers, distant cousins, all reaching out with variations of the same message. Saw the news. Is it true? Are you really suing your parents? I didn't respond to most of them. A few I answered with simple, non-committal replies. It's a legal matter. I can't discuss details. But one message stood out. It was from someone I'd worked with years ago on a drilling project in Woodward County, a geologist named Marcus Patel. We hadn't spoken in at least 5 years, but his message was direct and sincere. Trevor, just saw the article. Don't know the full story, but I remember you talking about your grandfather back in the day. He sounded like a good man. Hope you get what you're owed. Stay strong. It was a small thing, but it landed differently than the others. Someone who remembered, who believed me without needing proof. I wrote back. Thanks, Marcus. Means more than you know. That afternoon Vanessa went public. Not through a lawyer or official statement but through social media. She posted a long caption on her perfectly curated feed. The one filled with pictures of her kids in matching outfits and artfully arranged charcuterie boards and inspirational quotes about gratitude. The post was a photo of our family from years ago, all of us smiling at some holiday gathering, the kind of picture that looked warm and perfect and completely fake. The caption read, "Family is supposed to be about love and support, not greed and bitterness. It breaks my heart to see someone I grew up with choose money over the people who raised him and stood by him through everything. We offered him a home when he had nowhere else to go. And this is how he repays us. By dragging us through the courts and airing private matters for the world to judge. I'm not going to engage with the lies and accusations, but I will say this, some people will do anything to avoid taking responsibility for their own failures. Praying for healing and truth to prevail." The post had already racked up hundreds of likes and dozens of comments by the time I saw it. Most of them were supportive of her. People who didn't know the full story offering prayers and encouragement. A few were harsher, questioning my motives, calling me ungrateful and vindictive. But there were others, a smaller group but vocal, who pushed back. One comment stood out. "If he's suing, there's probably a reason. Courts don't just take these cases for fun. Maybe let the legal system do its job before jumping to conclusions." Another said, "Interesting how she's talking about private matters while posting this publicly. Just saying." I closed the app and set the phone aside. Okonkwo had been right. It was getting uglier. That evening my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Yeah, Mr. Kade?" A woman's voice asked, professional but warm. "This is Monica Desai with the Tulsa Beacon. I'm the reporter who wrote the article about your family's estate case. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions for a follow-up piece." I hesitated. My lawyer advised me not to speak to the press. "I understand," she said quickly, "and I respect that. But I want to make sure the story is accurate and fair. I've received some statements from other parties, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to provide your perspective if you're comfortable doing so. Even off the record if you prefer." I sat down on the edge of the bed, weighing it. What kind of statements? She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your sister posted something on social media this afternoon. It's gotten significant attention. I've also been contacted by a family friend who claims you have a history of financial instability and resentment toward your parents. I wanted to verify those claims before publishing anything further." I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. "Who's the family friend?" "I can't disclose that," she said. "But I can tell you they don't seem to have first-hand knowledge of the case details, just opinions." I was quiet for a moment thinking. Then I said, "Off the record." "Completely off the record," she confirmed. "Off the record," I said slowly, "this isn't about money or resentment. It's about a will that was altered after my grandfather died. Assets that were hidden during probate, and a family that spent 15 years pretending I didn't deserve what he intended for me. I have documentation. I have legal standing. And I'm not going to let them rewrite history to make themselves look like victims." There was silence on the other end, then the sound of typing. She spoke again, her voice softer. "For what it's worth, I believe you. I've covered enough of these cases to know when something doesn't add up. But I need evidence I can publish. If you're willing to share documentation, even redacted versions, it would go a long way toward balancing the narrative." "I'll talk to my lawyer," I said. "If he clears it, I'll send you what I can." "Thank you," she said. "And Mr. Kade, I know this isn't easy, but the truth has a way of coming out, especially when people try this hard to bury it." We hung up and I immediately called Okonkwo. He answered on the second ring. "I heard from a reporter," I said. "Tulsa Beacon. She wants documentation for a follow-up story. What do I do?" Okonkwo was quiet for a beat. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing on the record. I said I'd check with you first." "Good," he said. "Here's my advice. Don't engage directly. Let me handle media inquiries. But," and he paused, "if you want to provide her with select documents, things that are already part of the public court record, that's your prerogative. Just make sure it's strategic. Don't hand over anything that could compromise the case or give the other side ammunition." "I'll put together a packet," I said. "You review it before I send anything." "Works for me." I spent the next 2 hours compiling a file. The original will from Uncle Don. The probate filing with the suspicious timeline. A summary of the mineral rights transfers with dates and amounts. Nothing privileged. Nothing that hadn't already been submitted to the court. Just the facts, clean and undeniable. I sent it to Okonkwo. He reviewed it overnight and gave me the green light Tuesday morning. I forwarded the file to Monica with a brief note. As promised, everything here is part of the public record. Use it responsibly. Her reply came within minutes. Thank you. This is exactly what I needed. Expect the article by Thursday. Wednesday was quieter, almost eerily so. No calls from family. No new social media posts. Just the hum of the legal process grinding forward in the background. I used the time to meet with Richard Holbrook at the bank. His office was on the top floor of the First National Building, all dark wood and leather chairs and windows overlooking the Arkansas River. He greeted me with a firm handshake and gestured to a seat across from his desk. Mr. Kade, he said, settling into his chair. Thank you for coming in. I wanted to discuss the account discrepancy I mentioned in my email. I leaned forward slightly. What did you find? He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a printout. In 2009, your grandfather opened a trust account in your name. The initial deposit was $250,000. Funds transferred from the sale of a property in Texas County. The account was designated for your benefit, to be accessible when you turn 25. I felt my pulse quicken. I never knew about this. That's the issue, Holbrook said. The account was closed in 2010, shortly after your grandfather's death. The funds were transferred to an account held by your father, with documentation indicating it was part of estate consolidation. But, he tapped the paper, the original trust agreement specified that the account could only be closed with your written consent or a court order. Neither existed. So the transfer was illegal. Potentially, yes. It would depend on whether your father had legal authority as executor to override the trust terms. Given what you've shared about the contested will, I'd say there's a strong case that he did not. How much was in the account when it was closed? I asked. Holbrook glanced at the paper. $273,000. Accounting for interest. That money was supposed to be mine. He nodded. If the trust agreement holds up, yes. I can provide copies of all the documentation to your attorney. It should strengthen your case considerably. I sat back processing. Another piece. Another layer of deception. Do you have any idea why this wasn't flagged earlier? I asked. Holbrook looked uncomfortable. Trust accounts are typically reviewed periodically, but there can be gaps, especially if the parties involved don't raise concerns. In this case, the closure was processed internally without external audit. It's a failure on our part, and I apologize. I'll make sure you get everything you need, I said. Send it all to Okonkwo. He made a note. Consider it done. That evening, I sat in the hotel room with all the new information spread out on the desk. The trust account. The mineral rights. The falsified will. It was overwhelming, the sheer scope of what had been taken from me. But it was also clarifying. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasure, about a deliberate effort to remove me from my own family's legacy. And they'd almost succeeded. Thursday morning, Monica's article dropped. The headline was sharper this time. Estate fraud allegations surface in Tulsa family dispute. Documents reveal concealed assets. The article was thorough. She'd included excerpts from the original will, details about the mineral rights transfers, and a timeline showing the discrepancies. She'd also quoted an anonymous legal expert who said cases like this often involved elder abuse or undue influence, and that the evidence presented appeared credible. She'd reached out to my father for comment. His response, provided through a family attorney I didn't recognize, was brief and defensive. These allegations are baseless and motivated by personal grievances. We intend to vigorously defend against this lawsuit, and are confident the truth will prevail. Vanessa had declined to comment. My mother hadn't responded. The article ended with a note that the case was ongoing, and that further developments would be covered as they emerged. By midday, the article had been picked up by a few regional outlets. By evening, it was trending locally on social media. The comments section was a battlefield. Some people defended my family, calling me an opportunist. Others supported me, sharing their own stories of estate disputes and family betrayal. A few were just there for the drama, making jokes and memes. I didn't read most of it. I didn't need to. The truth was out there now, and that was enough. Friday afternoon, I got a call from Okonkwo. "We need to meet," he said. "Something's happened." I drove to his office, adrenaline thrumming under my skin. When I walked into the conference room, he was already there along with a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "This is Lauren Fitzpatrick," Okonkwo said. "She's a forensic accountant I brought in to analyze the financial documents. She's found something significant." Lauren slid a folder across the table. "I've been tracing the money from your grandfather's estate," she said. "The mineral rights sales, the trust account closure, all of it. Most of the funds went into accounts controlled by your father, but there's a trail leading to a secondary account opened in 2012. She paused. "That account is held jointly by your father and sister." I stared at the paper. "Vanessa was involved?" Lauren nodded. "She's been receiving regular transfers from that account for years. It looks like she's been a direct beneficiary of the concealed assets, which means she potentially has legal liability in this case as well." "How much are we talking?" I asked. "Roughly $400,000 over the last decade," Lauren said. "Payments disguised as gifts or loans, but the pattern is consistent and traceable." I sat back, the weight of it settling over me. So this wasn't just my parents. She knew. Or at least benefited knowingly. "That'll be for the court to determine," Okonkwo said. "But yes, it significantly expands the scope of the case. We'll need to amend the petition to include her as a defendant." "Do it," I said. The words came out harder than I intended, but I didn't take them back. She wanted to make this public. She wanted to play the victim. Now she can explain this. Okonkwo made a note. "We'll file the amendment Monday. In the meantime, expect more pushback. This is going to escalate quickly." I left the office as the sun was setting, the sky streaked with orange and purple. My phone was buzzing again, messages piling up, but I ignored them. I drove to Guthrie Green, the same park I'd been to before, and sat on the grass as the evening crowd filtered in. There was no band tonight, just the ambient noise of people talking and laughing, living their lives. I pulled out my phone and opened a voice memo app. I didn't know why, but I felt the need to say something out loud to mark this moment. "My name is Trevor James Kade," I said quietly, my voice steady. "And I'm taking back what's mine. Not because I need the money. Not because I want revenge. But because the truth matters. Because my grandfather believed in me, and I won't let them erase that." I stopped recording and saved the file. Then I stood, brushed the grass off my jeans, and walked back to my car. The following week moved fast. The amended petition was filed. Vanessa's name appeared in the court documents. The media picked it up immediately. Monica wrote another article. This one focused on the forensic findings and the expansion of the lawsuit. The comments exploded again. But this time the tide had shifted. More people were questioning my family's version of events. More people were sharing the articles, dissecting the details, pointing out inconsistencies. Vanessa deleted her original Instagram post. Then she made her account private. My parents hired a PR consultant, someone who put out a bland statement about respecting the legal process and maintaining dignity. But the damage was done. The narrative had slipped out of their control. By the end of the month, their attorney reached out to Okonkwo. They wanted to discuss settlement. We met in a neutral conference room at a mediator's office downtown. My father sat on one side of the table with his lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he billed by the breath. My mother sat beside him, her face drawn and tight. Vanessa wasn't there. Okonkwo and I sat across from them. The mediator, an older woman with gray hair and a calm, authoritative presence, opened the session. "We're here to explore the possibility of resolving this matter outside of court. I'd like to start by hearing from both parties about their objectives. What are you hoping to achieve today?" Okonkwo spoke first. "My client is seeking full restitution for assets that were unlawfully withheld from him, including the value of mineral rights, the trust account, and associated interest and damages. We're also pursuing a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a correction of the probate record." The other attorney adjusted his glasses. "My clients dispute the characterization of wrongdoing. They believe this is a misunderstanding that has been blown out of proportion by media attention and emotional grievances." I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is fraud. And I have 15 years of documentation to prove it. My father finally spoke, his voice rough. Trevor, this has gone too far. We're family. We can work this out without destroying each other. I met his eyes. You stopped being my family the day you kicked me out of a house I own. There was silence. Heavy and cold. My mother's hands were shaking. The mediator cleared her throat. Let's focus on practical solutions. Mr. Kade, what would a satisfactory resolution look like for you? I glanced at Okonkwo. He nodded slightly. I want every dollar accounted for, I said. Every mineral rights sale, every transfer, every payment that should have been mine. I want it returned with interest. I want a public acknowledgement that my grandfather's original will was valid, and that I was his intended heir. And I want them to vacate the property on Oak Ridge Drive within 60 days. The other attorney started to object, but my father held up a hand. How much are we talking? He asked, his voice flat. Lauren had run the numbers. Okonkwo slid a document across the table. $3.1 million. That's the conservative estimate. It could go higher depending on what else we uncover in discovery. My mother made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. We don't have that kind of money. Then you'll sell assets, I said. The house, the cars, whatever it takes. You took it from me. Now you give it back. The mediation ended without resolution. They asked for time to consider. Okonkwo told them they had 2 weeks before we proceeded to trial. We walked out together, the late afternoon sun blinding after the dim conference room. You did well in there, he said. Stayed calm, stayed focused. I nodded, but I didn't feel victorious. Just tired. 2 weeks later they settled. Not for the full amount but close. $2.7 million, paid out over 3 years, plus the house vacated within 90 days and a formal statement acknowledging the validity of my grandfather's original will. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. The day the settlement was finalized, I drove out to my grandfather's grave. It was in a small cemetery on the west side of town, rows of simple headstones under sprawling oak trees. I hadn't been there in years. His stone was modest. Robert James Kade. Beloved father and grandfather. I knelt down and traced the letters with my fingers. I did it, I said quietly. I got it back. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to honor what you wanted. Enough to prove they couldn't erase me. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and earth. I stayed there for a long time, just sitting, just breathing. When I finally stood and walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, not yet. But peace. And that was the start. The settlement money didn't arrive all at once. It came in structured payments, the first installment hitting my account on a gray Tuesday morning in early November. I was sitting in a new apartment I'd leased in the Brady Arts District. A loft with exposed brick walls and tall windows that let in sheets of natural light. The space was mine, truly mine, chosen by me, paid for by me, with no ghosts lingering in the corners. When the notification popped up on my phone, I stared at it for a long moment. $900,000. The first third of what they owed me. I should have felt elated, victorious, something big and triumphant. Instead I felt quiet. Settled. Like a bone that had been broken for years finally setting back into place. I made coffee, stood by the window watching people move through the street below, and let myself just exist in that moment without needing it to be anything more than what it was. The apartment had become a kind of sanctuary over the past few weeks. After the settlement was finalized, I'd spent days looking at places, walking through empty rooms, imagining what my life could look like when it wasn't defined by what had been taken from me. This loft had felt right the moment I stepped inside. It was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse, the kind of building that had once housed manufacturing equipment and now held artists, writers, small tech startups. My neighbors were a mix of people who worked odd hours and kept to themselves, the kind of community that respected boundaries but nodded hello in the hallways. I'd furnished it simply. A couch, a bed, a desk for work, bookshelves I was slowly filling. No clutter. No excess. Just what I needed and what made me feel grounded. The walls were still mostly bare except for one piece I'd hung above the desk, a framed geological survey map of western Oklahoma, the kind my grandfather used to spread across his kitchen table and annotate with a pencil. I'd found it in a box of his things Uncle Don had kept, and he'd given it to me the week after the settlement closed. "It's yours now," he'd said simply, and I'd taken it like the inheritance it was. The second thing that changed after the settlement was my relationship with work. I'd always loved what I did, the problem-solving, the technical challenges, the satisfaction of finding value where others saw nothing. But for years I'd been working with a kind of desperation underneath it all, trying to prove something, trying to build enough success that it couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Now, with the financial pressure gone and the validation I'd been seeking finally arrived, I found myself working differently. More selectively. More intentionally. I turned down a project that would have paid well but didn't interest me. I took on a smaller contract with a nonprofit focused on sustainable energy development because the mission mattered. I started saying no without guilt, and yes without needing external approval. Alexis noticed. We met for lunch one afternoon at a bistro near her office, and she studied me across the table with that sharp, assessing gaze she used when reviewing balance sheets. "You seem different," she said, spearing a piece of grilled chicken with her fork. "Good different. More like yourself, if that makes sense." "I do feel more like myself," I admitted. "It's strange. I spent so long fighting to be seen, and now that I don't need to be seen, I actually feel more visible." She smiled. "That's not strange. That's growth." We talked about the business, about upcoming projects, about her ideas for expanding into new markets. Alexis had been with me since the beginning, back when Kade Energy Solutions was just me and a laptop and a lot of hope. She'd believed in the work when no one else did, and she'd never asked for more than I could give. Now, with the settlement money and the business stable, I wanted to do something for her. "I've been thinking," I said, setting down my fork. "I want to restructure the company. Make you a partner, not just an employee. Give you equity, a real stake in what we're building." She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Trevor, you don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to," I said. "I want to. You've earned it. And honestly, I don't want to build this alone anymore. I want to build it with people I trust, people who've been there when it mattered." She was quiet for a moment, and I saw her eyes get a little glassy before she blinked it away. "Okay," she said, her voice steady but softer than usual. "Let's do it." We shook hands across the table, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt like something I was building rather than something I was bracing for. The third thing that changed was my relationship with my family, or rather, the final dissolution of it. The house on Oak Ridge Drive sat empty for 3 weeks after my parents moved out. I'd driven by once, unable to help myself, and seen the for sale sign planted in the front yard. The lawn was overgrown, the shutters still chipped. It looked smaller than I remembered, less significant. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. That chapter was closed, and I had no interest in reopening it. My mother tried to reach out once, about a month after the settlement. She sent a letter, actual physical mail, forwarded to my new address, though I had no idea how she'd gotten it. The envelope was plain, her handwriting neat and controlled on the front. I opened it standing by the kitchen counter, the paper thin and slightly perfumed. "Trevor," it began. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I won't pretend that what happened was anything other than painful for everyone involved. But I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you. Your father and I truly believed we were doing what was best, protecting the family, keeping things stable. I see now that we were wrong, or at least that our intentions don't excuse the outcome. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I think about you. And I hope you're finding peace wherever you are." She'd signed it simply, Mom. I read the letter twice, then folded it and set it aside. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't respond either. There was nothing left to say. She wanted absolution, or maybe just to feel less guilty, and I wasn't interested in providing either. Some bridges, once burned, don't get rebuilt. And that was okay. Vanessa never reached out. I heard through Uncle Don that she and Brad had separated, the stress of the lawsuit and the financial fallout apparently too much for a marriage that had always been more about appearances than foundation. I felt a flicker of something when I heard that, not quite sympathy but not satisfaction either. Just a kind of sad recognition that we'd all paid a price for the choices that had been made. My father never contacted me at all, and I was grateful for that. By December, Tulsa had settled into the kind of cold that made the air feel brittle. I spent the holidays quietly, declining invitations from acquaintances who felt obligated to include me, and instead choosing solitude that felt intentional rather than lonely. Christmas Eve, I drove out to Uncle Don's house. He'd invited me for dinner, just the two of us, and I'd accepted. His house was warm and cluttered in the best way. A fire going in the fireplace, the smell of roast chicken and potatoes filling the kitchen. We ate at the small table by the window, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. He told me stories about my grandfather, things I'd never heard, small moments that painted a picture of a man who'd been thoughtful and stubborn and deeply principled. Your grandpa used to say the land teaches you patience, Don said, pouring us each a second glass of whiskey. You can't rush it. You can't force it. You just have to pay attention and wait for it to show you what it's got. Sounds like him, I said. Don looked at me across the table, his expression serious. You did right by him, Trevor. I know it cost you, but you did right. That means something. I nodded, throat tight. Thanks for keeping that will. Thanks for not letting it disappear. He raised his glass. To Robert. And to you. We clinked glasses and drank, the whiskey burning warm all the way down. After dinner I helped him clean up, then sat on the porch while he smoked a cigar, the winter air sharp and clear. The stars were out, bright against the black sky, and for a while we just sat in comfortable silence. When I finally drove home, the city was quiet, most people tucked inside with their families. I didn't feel excluded. I felt free. The new year came and went without fanfare. I worked, I ran, I read. I started going to a climbing gym downtown. Something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. The physical challenge was grounding. The focus required to navigate a route leaving no room for anything else. I got better slowly, methodically, learning to trust my body and my instincts. One evening in late January, I was at the gym when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Trevor Kade. I turned and saw Marcus Patel, the geologist I'd worked with years ago, grinning at me with a climbing harness slung over his shoulder. No way, I said, surprised and genuinely happy to see him. What are you doing here? Could ask you the same thing, he said. I live about 10 minutes from here. Been coming to this place for years. We caught up while I belayed him on a route, talking about work and life and everything that had happened since we'd last seen each other. He didn't bring up the lawsuit directly, but he mentioned he'd followed the news and was glad things had worked out. Takes guts to do what you did, he said. Chalk dust on his hands as he clipped into the next hold. Most people wouldn't. I just shrugged. Didn't feel like I had a choice. Before he left, he handed me his card. Let's grab coffee sometime. I'm working on a project that might interest you. Sustainable drilling tech, minimizing environmental impact. Could use someone with your expertise. I took the card, genuinely interested. I'll reach out. And I did. A week later. We met at a coffee shop in Kendall Whittier, and he laid out the project. It was ambitious, innovative, exactly the kind of work I wanted to be doing. I signed on as a consultant, and within a month I was fully immersed. By early spring, my life had found a rhythm that felt sustainable. I was working on projects I cared about, spending time with people who respected me, living in a space that felt like home. The settlement money sat mostly untouched in investment accounts, growing quietly while I figured out what I wanted to do with it. I thought about my grandfather often, about what he would have wanted me to build with the foundation he tried to give me. One afternoon in March, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mr. Kade? A man's voice asked, formal and measured. This is Faisal Al-Rahman. I straightened in my chair, surprised. Prince Faisal. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Please, just Faisal, he said with a slight laugh. I've been meaning to reach out for some time. I read about your family situation in the news. I wanted to express my support and see how you were doing. I'm doing well, I said cautiously. Thank you for asking. He paused. I also wanted to discuss something business-related if you have time. Our consortium is looking to expand operations in the region, and your name has come up repeatedly as someone we'd like to partner with more extensively. There's a project in the Texas Panhandle, significant scope, and I believe you'd be an ideal lead consultant. I'd love to hear more, I said, genuinely intrigued. Excellent. I'll have my team send over the details. And Trevor, he added, his tone shifting slightly, I want you to know that I've always respected your work. Your sister may have introduced us socially, but it's your expertise that earned my business. That's the only currency that matters in this field. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. The project details arrived 2 days later, and they were everything Faisal had promised. Ambitious, lucrative, and aligned with the kind of sustainable practices I'd been focusing on. I spent a week reviewing the proposal, consulting with Alexis and Marcus, and then I accepted. By April, I was traveling between Tulsa and the Panhandle, overseeing surveys and coordinating with engineers. The work was demanding, but it was also exhilarating. I was building something real, something that would last beyond me. One evening, after a long day on site, I drove back to Tulsa and stopped at Philbrook Museum. The gardens were in full bloom, tulips and daffodils painting the terraces in bright colors. I walked the paths slowly, hands in my pockets, breathing in the cool evening air. I found myself at the same bench where I'd sat months ago, back when everything was still unsettled, still raw. Now, sitting here again, I felt the distance I'd traveled, not just in miles but in every other way that mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from Uncle Don. Saw your name in the paper again. Good press this time. Proud of you, kid. I smiled and typed back. Thanks. Coffee this weekend? His response was immediate. You're buying. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the garden. I stayed until the light faded and the first stars appeared, then walked back to my car, feeling lighter than I had in years. Summer brought new opportunities and unexpected closures. In June, I received a formal invitation to speak at an energy conference in Houston, a panel on innovative practices in mineral rights management. It was the kind of recognition I'd once craved desperately, and now it felt like a natural progression rather than a validation I needed. I accepted and spent 2 weeks preparing, not because I was nervous but because I wanted to do it well. The conference was held at a massive convention center, the kind of place with endless hallways and conference rooms named after Texas cities. I gave my presentation to a room of about 200 people, industry professionals, academics, a few journalists. I talked about sustainable practices, about balancing profit with responsibility, about learning to see land as more than just a resource to be extracted. The response was positive, even enthusiastic. Afterward, several people approached me with questions, business cards, offers to collaborate. One of them was a woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and direct, who introduced herself as the head of an environmental advocacy group. Your grandfather would be proud, she said. And I realized with a start that she'd known him, worked with him on some early conservation projects back in the 80s. He always said the best oilmen were the ones who respected what they were taking. You sound just like him. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved. That means more than you know. That night, I had dinner with Faisal and a few members of his team. We talked business, but we also talked about family, legacy, the weight of expectations. He shared stories about growing up in a family where every decision was scrutinized, where success was assumed and failure unthinkable. I realized we had more in common than I'd thought, despite our vastly different backgrounds. At the end of the evening, as we were saying our goodbyes, he shook my hand and said something I didn't expect. You've built something honorable, Trevor. Not just a business but a reputation. That's rarer than you think. Hold on to it. I will, I said. And I meant it. By the time I returned to Tulsa, summer was in full swing. The city felt alive, festivals and markets filling the streets, the Arkansas River crowded with kayaks and paddleboards. I started spending more time outside, exploring trails I'd never made time for, sitting in parks and watching the world move around me. One Saturday morning in July, I was at the Gathering Place, a sprawling park along the river, when I saw a familiar face. It was the woman from Guthrie Green, the one who'd asked me about the bathrooms months ago. She was sitting on a bench with a book, a coffee cup beside her. I hesitated, then walked over. Excuse me, I said. I think we met before. At Guthrie Green? She looked up, studied me for a moment, then smiled in recognition. Oh yeah, the guy who needed to be around people without being with people. Exactly, I said, laughing. Mind if I sit? She gestured to the bench. Be my guest. We talked for over an hour. Her name was Claire. She was a graphic designer, freelance, recently moved to Tulsa from Kansas City. She was funny, easy to talk to, and refreshingly uninterested in asking probing questions about my life. We talked about the city, about books, about the strange comfort of being anonymous in a crowd. When we finally parted ways, she handed me her card. If you ever want to grab coffee or just sit in a park and not talk, let me know. I took the card, grinning. I might take you up on that. I did. 2 weeks later. We met at a coffee shop in Cherry Street, talked for 2 hours, then walked through the neighborhood looking at old houses and making up stories about the people who lived in them. It wasn't a date, not exactly, but it was something. A beginning, maybe. Possibility. By August, I'd settled into a version of my life that felt both stable and open-ended. The business was thriving. My partnership with Alexis was solid. The projects I was working on felt meaningful. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't measuring my worth by what I'd lost or what I'd fought to reclaim. I was just living, building, moving forward. One evening, I was sitting on my apartment balcony, watching the sun set over the city, when my phone rang. It was Monica Desai, the reporter who'd covered the lawsuit. "Mr. Kade," she said. "I wanted to let you know I'm working on a follow-up piece. A year later kind of thing. I was hoping to get a quote from you about how things have turned out." I thought about it for a moment, then said, "You can say this. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, but I'm also more myself than I've ever been. I learned that you can't control how people see you, but you can control how you see yourself. And that's enough." She thanked me, we said goodbye, and I set the phone down. The city stretched out below me, lights beginning to flicker on as the sky deepened to purple. I thought about my grandfather, about Uncle Don, about every moment that had led me here. I thought about the house on Oak Ridge Drive, now sold to a young family with 2 kids who'd never know the ghosts that had lived there before them. I thought about Vanessa and my parents wherever they were, whatever they were doing. And I realized I didn't need to know. I didn't need closure in the traditional sense, the tearful reconciliation or the final confrontation. I just needed to let go. And I had. The next morning, I woke early and went for a run along the river. The air was cool, the water calm, reflecting the pale morning sky. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs ached, and then I slowed to a walk, hands on my hips, breathing hard. A man passed me going the other direction, nodded in that universal runner's greeting. A woman walked by with a dog, the leash tangled around her legs, laughing as she tried to untangle it. Life, ordinary and extraordinary, happening all around me. I stood there for a long time just watching, just being. And then I turned and walked back toward home, toward the life I'd built, the life that was mine. Not because someone gave it to me, not because I took it from someone else, but because I'd earned it, piece by piece, decision by decision, truth by truth. And that, I realized, was the only inheritance that had ever really mattered. September arrived with the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer, and the air feel thick enough to swim through. I'd spent most of the month working remotely from the apartment, video calls with clients in air-conditioned comfort while the city baked outside. But on the 3rd Saturday of the month, I got an invitation I hadn't expected. It came in the form of a formal card, heavy cream-colored stock with elegant script, delivered to my apartment by messenger. "You are cordially invited to the annual Tulsa Energy Forum Gala, honoring this year's outstanding achievement in sustainable resource management." The recipient listed below the fancy calligraphy was my name, Trevor James Kade, Kade Energy Solutions. The event was in 2 weeks at the Gilcrease Museum, black tie, dinner and awards ceremony. I stared at the invitation for a long time, turning it over in my hands. A year ago, I'd been sitting on a bus stop bench with everything I owned in a duffel bag. Now I was being honored at an industry gala. The irony wasn't lost on me. I called Alexis. "Did you know about this?" I asked when she picked up. "The gala thing?" She laughed. "I may have submitted your name for consideration months ago. Congratulations, by the way. You could have warned me. Where's the fun in that?" She said. "Besides, you deserve it. The work you've done on the Panhandle project alone is award-worthy. Stop being modest and just accept it." I sighed, but I was smiling. "Fine. But you're coming with me." "As your date?" She teased. "As my business partner," I corrected. "We're in this together, remember? Deal. I'll get a dress." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. I had to rent a tuxedo, something I hadn't done since a friend's wedding 5 years ago. The shop downtown fitted me with a classic black suit, crisp white shirt, black bow tie. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. There was a confidence there that hadn't existed before, a kind of ease that came from knowing I'd earned my place rather than fought for scraps of approval. The night of the gala, I picked up Alexis from her house in Maple Ridge. She answered the door in a deep emerald dress, elegant and understated, Her hair swept up in a way that made her look both powerful and approachable. "You clean up nice," she said, looking me over. "Right back at you," I said, offering my arm. We drove to the museum as the sun was setting. The sky painted in shades of orange and pink. The Gilcrease sat on a hill overlooking the city, its grounds transformed for the evening with string lights and white tents, valet parking and a red carpet leading to the entrance. It felt surreal, walking up that carpet with Alexis beside me, photographers snapping pictures, a woman with a clipboard checking names against a guest list. Inside, the museum's main hall had been converted into a ballroom. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each set with crystal glasses and folded napkins shaped like swans. A small stage sat at the front, a podium and microphone waiting. A bar stretched along one wall, already crowded with people in tuxedos and gowns, the low hum of conversation filling the air. We found our assigned table near the front, nameplates indicating our seats. I recognized a few of the other names: industry colleagues, a professor from the university, a city council member I'd worked with on a zoning issue. As we sat down, a man at the next table turned and caught my eye. It took me a second to place him, and then I realized with a jolt who it was. Bradford Wright. Vanessa's husband. Or ex-husband, I suppose, though I hadn't kept up with the details. He looked older, more worn around the edges, the confidence he'd always carried now replaced with something tighter, more brittle. He hesitated, clearly debating whether to acknowledge me, then gave a small nod. "Trevor." "Brad," I said evenly. I didn't offer anything more, and neither did he. After a moment, he turned back to his own table, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Alexis leaned over. "That him?" "Yeah. You okay?" I nodded. "I'm fine." And I was. Seeing him didn't bring back the anger or hurt I might have expected. It just felt like looking at someone from a part of my life that no longer had any hold on me. Dinner was served, a multi-course affair with more silverware than seemed necessary. I picked at the food, too aware of the upcoming presentation to have much appetite. Around us, people mingled between courses, moving from table to table, shaking hands and exchanging business cards. Faisal appeared halfway through the main course, impeccably dressed and flanked by two members of his team. He stopped by our table, clasping my hand warmly. "Trevor, good to see you. Congratulations on the honor." "It's well deserved." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate you coming." He smiled. "I wouldn't miss it. You've become one of our most valuable partners. That kind of reliability is rare." He moved on to greet others, and Alexis raised her glass to me. "To reliability," she said with a grin. I clinked my glass against hers. "To showing up." As dessert was being served, the lights dimmed slightly, and a woman stepped up to the podium. She was in her 60s, poised and articulate, the president of the Tulsa Energy Council. She welcomed everyone, made a few remarks about the importance of innovation and responsibility in the industry, and then began the awards portion of the evening. There were several categories. Lifetime achievement went to a man who'd been in the business for 40 years. Emerging technology went to a startup developing AI for predictive drilling. Community impact went to a nonprofit working on rural electrification. And then she called my name. This year's award for outstanding achievement in sustainable resource management goes to Trevor Kade of Kade Energy Solutions for his pioneering work in minimizing environmental impact while maximizing resource efficiency. His projects have set a new standard in the industry, and his commitment to ethical practices has earned him the respect of colleagues and competitors alike. The room erupted in polite applause. I stood heart-pounding and made my way to the stage. The woman handed me a plaque, heavy and engraved, and gestured to the microphone. I hadn't prepared a speech. I'd thought about it, but every draft I'd written felt forced or insincere. So I decided to just speak from the gut. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady despite the nerves. "This is unexpected and I'm deeply honored. I want to start by acknowledging the people who made this possible. My business partner Alexis Chan, who believed in this work when it was just an idea. My clients who trusted me to deliver. And my grandfather Robert Kade, who taught me that understanding the land isn't just about extracting value. It's about respecting what's there and leaving it better than you found it." I paused, looking out at the crowd. A year ago, I was at a very different place in my life. I was questioning everything: my work, my worth, my place in the world. But I learned something important through that process. Success isn't about proving yourself to people who don't believe in you. It's about building something meaningful with people who do. So to everyone here tonight who's working to do this industry the right way, to balance profit with responsibility, to think long-term instead of short-term, thank you. You're the reason I'm still doing this work. And to anyone out there who's struggling, who feels like they're fighting an uphill battle, keep going. The work matters. You matter. And the right people will see it. The applause was louder this time, warmer. I stepped off the stage, plaque in hand, and returned to my seat. Alexis squeezed my shoulder. That was perfect, she said quietly. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and conversations. People I'd worked with, people I'd only heard of, even a few I didn't know at all, stopped by to shake my hand and offer their support. It was overwhelming in the best way, not because I needed the validation, but because it felt like recognition for the right reasons. As the event wound down and people began filtering out, I found myself standing on the museum's terrace, looking out over the city. Lights. The air had cooled, a breeze carrying the scent of grass and flowers from the gardens below. Brad appeared beside me, hands in his pockets, staring out at the same view. I didn't turn to look at him, just waited. For what it's worth, he said after a long silence, I'm sorry. For how things went down. For my part in it. I glanced at him. He looked sincere but also defeated, like a man who'd lost more than he'd expected, and was still trying to understand how it had happened. I appreciate that, I said. But I'm not interested in rehashing the past. He nodded. I get it. I just wanted you to know. He walked away and I watched him go, feeling nothing but a quiet sense of closure. That chapter was done. Truly done. October came with cooler temperatures and the first hints of fall color. I'd started working on a new project, a joint venture between Kade Energy Solutions and Marcus's sustainability group, focused on reclaiming abandoned drilling sites and restoring them to natural habitats. It was challenging, technical work that required balancing environmental goals with economic realities, but it was also some of the most satisfying work I'd ever done. One afternoon, I was out at a site near the Kansas border, coordinating with a team of engineers and environmental scientists, when my phone rang. It was Uncle Don. You busy? He asked. I'm on a site, but I can talk. What's up? He hesitated, which wasn't like him. I got a call from your mother today. My stomach tightened. What did she want? She's asking if there's any way to reach you. Says she has something she needs to tell you. Didn't specify what. I leaned against the hood of my truck, staring out at the flat expanse of land around me. What do you think I should do? Don was quiet for a moment. That's your call, son. But if you're asking my opinion, I'd say this. You don't owe her anything. But sometimes hearing someone out, even when you don't want to, gives you more peace than ignoring them. Not for their sake. For yours. I'll think about it, I said. That night, I sat in my apartment and stared at my phone for a long time. Finally, I pulled up my mother's contact, still saved under Mom even though it felt like a word that no longer applied, and typed a message. Uncle Don said you wanted to talk. If you have something to say, you can send it in writing. I'm not ready for a phone call. Her response came an hour later. Thank you for giving me this chance. I understand it's more than I deserve. Can I send you a letter? I'll keep it brief. I replied with a simple yes, then set the phone aside and tried not to think about it. The letter arrived a week later. Another handwritten envelope forwarded to my address. I let it sit on the counter for 2 days before I finally opened it. The letter was shorter this time, less performative. Trevor, it began. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to justify what we did. I'm writing because I've spent the last year coming to terms with the fact that I failed you as a mother. Not just in the ways you know about, but in smaller, quieter ways that built up over time until they became a wall between us. Your father and I were so focused on maintaining a certain image, a certain version of what family was supposed to look like, that we lost sight of the actual people in front of us. You were always different. You asked questions we couldn't answer. You wanted things we didn't understand. And instead of trying to understand, we dismissed you. We told ourselves it was for your own good, that we were teaching you resilience. But the truth is, we were just uncomfortable with anything that didn't fit our script. The letter continued. I won't pretend to know what you've been through since we last spoke. But I read about your award, and I felt something I didn't expect. Pride, yes, but also grief. Grief for the years I wasted not seeing you for who you really are. You didn't need us to succeed. You didn't need our approval or our support. And that's both a relief and a heartbreak. I hope you've found peace wherever you are. I hope you've built a life that makes you happy. And if you never want to hear from me again, I'll understand. She'd signed it with just her first name. Patricia. No mom. No love. Just her name. I read it twice, then folded it and set it aside. I didn't know how I felt about it. There was no grand revelation. No sudden forgiveness. Just a dull acknowledgement that she'd said what she needed to say, and I'd heard it. Maybe that was enough. A few days later I wrote back. It was brief, just a few lines. Thank you for the letter. I'm not ready for more than this, and I don't know if I ever will be. But I appreciate you taking responsibility. I hope you find peace too. I mailed it and that was the end of it. No follow-up, no attempts to reopen the conversation. Just two people acknowledging hurt and moving on. By November, I'd found a rhythm with Claire. We'd been seeing each other casually, coffee dates and long walks, the occasional dinner. Nothing rushed, nothing heavy. Just two people enjoying each other's company without expectations. One evening we were sitting on her couch in her small house in Florence Park, a neighborhood of older homes with big trees and front porches. She'd made pasta and we'd eaten while watching a nature documentary, her dog curled up between us. Can I ask you something? She said during a lull in the narration. Sure. Why don't you talk about your family? I glanced at her, surprised. You've noticed that, huh? She shrugged. It's not a criticism, just an observation. Most people mention their parents or siblings at some point. You don't. I was quiet for a moment, trying to figure out how much to say. There was a falling out, I said finally. Pretty significant one. We're not in contact anymore. She nodded, not pushing. That must have been hard. It was, I admitted. But it was also necessary. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I get that. My family's not perfect either. But I'm glad you're here now. Me too, I said. And I meant it. December brought the kind of cold that made you appreciate warm spaces and good company. I spent Christmas Eve with Uncle Don again, a tradition I was starting to look forward to. We cooked together this time, a disaster of a ham that turned out better than it had any right to, and spent the evening playing cards and telling stories. On Christmas Day, I drove out to my grandfather's grave again. The cemetery was quiet, the ground dusted with frost. I knelt by his headstone and set down a small arrangement of flowers I'd picked up from a grocery store. It's been a good year, I said quietly. I think you'd be proud. The wind rustled through the bare branches overhead, and I stayed there for a while, just sitting in the cold, feeling connected to something larger than myself. When I finally stood and walked back to my car, I felt lighter. Not because the weight was gone, but because I'd learned to carry it differently. As the year came to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. I'd gone from being discarded to being recognized. From fighting for scraps to building something solid. From needing approval to finding peace in my own validation. But more than any of that, I'd learned that the most important inheritance wasn't money or property or even family legacy. It was the ability to define your own worth, to build your own foundation, to walk away from what doesn't serve you and toward what does. New Year's Eve, I threw a small party at my apartment. Just a handful of people. Alexis and her husband, Marcus and a few colleagues from the sustainability project. Claire, Uncle Don. We ate too much food, drank champagne at midnight, and watched the fireworks over the river from my balcony. As the last burst of color faded from the sky, Claire leaned against the railing beside me. What are you hoping for this year? She asked. I thought about it. More of this, I said. Good work. Good people. Peace. She smiled. Sounds perfect. It did. Really did. The next morning, I woke early and went for a run along the river. The city was quiet, recovering from the night before, and the air was crisp and clean. I ran until my mind cleared, until the only thing I felt was the steady rhythm of my feet, hitting the pavement and the cold air filling my lungs. When I got back to the apartment, I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. My phone buzzed with messages. Happy New Year texts from people I cared about. A reminder about a meeting later in the week. An email from a potential client. Life moving forward. I opened my laptop and started drafting a proposal for a new project, something I'd been thinking about for months. A mentorship program for young professionals entering the energy industry, focused on ethical practices and sustainable development. It would take time, resources, connections, but it felt right. It felt like something my grandfather would have done. By mid-January, the mentorship program was taking shape. I'd partnered with the university, secured initial funding from a few industry donors, and recruited Marcus and Alexis to help with curriculum development. The first cohort would start in the fall. 10 students selected based on merit and passion rather than connections or pedigree. It was a small start, but it was a start. One afternoon, I was meeting with a professor at the university to finalize some details when I ran into someone I hadn't expected to see. Vanessa. She was coming out of a building near the campus library, dressed in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked different, less polished, more human. We saw each other at the same moment, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then she walked over, stopping a few feet away. "Trevor," she said. Her voice was tentative, uncertain. "Vanessa." We stood there in awkward silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down between us. "I'm glad I ran into you," she said finally. "I've been wanting to say something, but I didn't know how." I waited. "I'm sorry," she said. "For all of it. For what I did, for what I didn't do, for the things I said. You were right. About everything." I didn't know how to respond. The apology felt genuine, but it also felt too late, too small for the scale of what had happened. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "But I'm not sure what you want me to say." "I don't want you to say anything," she said. "I just needed you to hear it." She looked down at her hands, then back up at me. "I lost a lot in the last year. My marriage. My reputation. A lot of money. But the thing I regret most is losing you. Not because of what you could have done for me, but because you were my brother, and I didn't see it until it was too late." I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not the same person I was, Vanessa. And we're not going to be the siblings we might have been. Too much has happened. But I don't wish you harm. I hope you find your way." She nodded, eyes glassy. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve." She turned and walked away, and I watched her go. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace. Just two people acknowledging hurt and moving in different directions. And that was okay. By the time spring arrived, I felt settled in a way I'd never experienced before. The business was thriving. The mentorship program was launching. My relationship with Claire had deepened into something real and sustaining. I'd even started looking at houses, thinking about putting down roots in a more permanent way. One Saturday in April, I drove out to a property on the edge of town. A small craftsman-style house with a wide front porch and a yard full of old trees. It needed work, but it had good bones, the kind of place you could make your own. The realtor walked me through, pointing out features and flaws, but I was only half listening. I was imagining what it could be. A home office where I could work. A garden where I could grow vegetables. A porch where I could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set. A place that was mine, not because I'd fought for it or taken it from someone else, but because I'd chosen it. I made an offer that afternoon. By May, I'd closed on the house and started renovations. Nothing major, just updates to make it comfortable and functional. Uncle Don helped with some of the work, teaching me how to install new fixtures and patch drywall. Claire came over on weekends to help paint, and we spent hours covered in splatters, laughing at our lack of expertise. One evening after a long day of work, we sat on the porch with beers, watching fireflies blink in the yard. "This is nice," Claire said. "Really nice." "Yeah," I agreed. "It is." She looked at me, her expression soft. "You've built a good life, Trevor. You should be proud." "I am," I said. "For the first time, I really am." As summer approached, the mentorship program accepted its first cohort. 10 students, diverse backgrounds, all hungry to learn and eager to make a difference. I met with them individually, heard their stories, saw myself in their ambition and uncertainty. The first session was in June, held in a conference room at the university. I stood at the front, looking at their faces, and felt a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. "Welcome," I said. "Over the next few months, we're going to talk about a lot of things. Technical skills, industry practices, ethical considerations. But more than that, we're going to talk about building a career that means something. Not just to you but to the world." One of the students, a young woman with bright eyes and a notebook already open, raised her hand. How do you know when you're on the right path? I smiled. You don't always. But you know you're on the wrong path when you're building something that doesn't align with who you are. So the key is to stay true to your values, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. They nodded, scribbling notes, and I felt something shift inside me. This was what my grandfather had wanted. Not just for me to succeed, but for me to pass it forward. To build something that outlasted me. By the end of summer, the house was finished. I moved in on a Saturday in August, boxes piled in every room, furniture scattered. In configurations I'd figure out later. Claire helped, and so did Uncle Don, Alexis, and Marcus. We ordered pizza, drank beer on the porch, and christened the space with laughter and stories. That night, after everyone had gone home, I stood in the empty living room and looked around. The walls were painted a soft gray. The floors were refinished hardwood. The windows let in light that made everything feel open and warm. It was mine. Truly, completely mine. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app, the same one I'd used months ago in the park. My name is Trevor James Kade, I said. And this is where I start the next chapter. I saved the file, then walked out onto the porch and sat in the chair I'd placed there earlier. The night was warm, the air filled with the sound of crickets and distant traffic. I closed my eyes and just breathed. This was peace. This was home. This was everything I'd fought for and more than I'd ever imagined. And it was only the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.